Have you ever wondered why food from a Chinese restaurant tastes completely different from anything you make at home, even when you follow the exact same recipe? For decades, Chinese chefs guarded their kitchen secrets with fierce loyalty, and some of these techniques were so unusual, so counterintuitive, that Western food authorities actually flagged them as dangerous, wasteful, or just plain wrong. Health inspectors raised eyebrows, culinary schools dismissed them, and yet generation after generation of Chinese cooks kept producing food that made people close their eyes and sigh. Now, food scientists, chemists, and nutrition researchers have spent years studying these ancient techniques, and the results are stunning. These methods were not just harmless, they were genius. Today we are counting down all 30 of them, and every single one comes with exactly what to do and why it actually works. Let us get into it. Number 30. Cooking with a lightly rusted wok. Yes, you heard that correctly. For decades, American health departments flagged woks with surface oxidation as unsanitary and potentially hazardous. Chinese home cooks were told to throw them out or scrub them to bare metal. But researchers at the University of California studying traditional cast iron and carbon steel cookware found something remarkable. A properly seasoned wok that has developed a specific type of controlled oxidation actually creates a microscopic polymer layer embedded with iron oxide that is both non-reactive at cooking temperatures and enriches food with trace dietary iron. Here's how you do it correctly. Take your carbon steel wok that has a brownish patina rather than bright orange rust. Wash it with hot water only, no soap. Heat it until the surface just begins to smoke slightly. Add a thin layer of lard or pork fat, which is the traditional choice, and rub it across the entire surface with a cloth. That light oxidation is not contamination. It is your cooking surface maturing. The science confirms the iron transfer is bioavailable and beneficial, especially for women with low iron levels. Number 29. Using tea to tenderize meat before cooking. Traditional Chinese butchers would soak tough cuts in cold-brewed tea overnight before selling them. Western food inspectors banned this practice in imported meats because they could not classify tea as an approved food additive in a preservation context. The chemistry explains everything. Tea contains tannins, which are polyphenolic compounds that break down the connective tissue proteins in tough meat cuts without the acidic breakdown you get from vinegar or citrus, meaning the meat stays firmer on the outside while becoming genuinely tender inside. Brew a strong pot of black tea or oolong, roughly 6 tea bags per quart of water. Let it cool completely. Submerge your beef short ribs, pork shoulder, or duck legs overnight in the fridge. Pat dry before cooking. The tannins do the work while also adding a subtle depth of flavor that is almost imperceptible, but makes people wonder why your braised dishes taste so much better than theirs. Number 28. Velveting meat with baking soda. This one was actually banned from restaurant supply chains in Canada in the 1990s because food safety regulators thought adding an alkaline chemical to raw meat was a contamination risk. Chinese restaurants fought the regulation for years. Biochemists at food science departments in both Toronto and Shanghai published simultaneous papers confirming that baking soda, when applied correctly, alters the pH of the meat surface to prevent proteins from bonding tightly when heated. The result is that impossibly silky texture you get in Chinese restaurant beef that you can never replicate at home. Here is the exact method. For every pound of sliced beef or chicken, mix 1 teaspoon of baking soda with just enough water to make a slurry. Coat the meat. Let it sit for exactly 15 to 20 minutes, then rinse it completely under cold water before cooking. Do not skip the rinse. Do not go longer than 20 minutes or the texture becomes spongy rather than silky. This is restaurant-level technique now verified as completely safe. Number 27. Steaming fish over boiling water with the lid cracked. Traditional Chinese fish cooks always left a small gap in the steamer lid, roughly the width of a chopstick. Western culinary schools taught that you needed a fully sealed steam environment for even cooking. A Japanese and Chinese collaborative food science study from 2019 showed that the cracked lid creates a convection current inside the steamer that circulates hot, humid air more efficiently than a sealed environment. The steam also escapes with excess sulfur compounds from the fish as they volatilize, which is why properly steamed Chinese fish never has that fishy smell. When you steam your next whole fish or fillet, place it on a plate above boiling water. Set your lid slightly ajar using a chopstick underneath one edge and steam on high heat for 8 minutes for a pound of fish. The result is cleaner, sweeter tasting fish with genuinely even texture. Number 26. Adding cold water to boiling dumplings 3 times. Every Chinese grandmother does this. You bring your water to a full boil, add dumplings, and every time the water comes back to a boil, you add a cup of cold water. You do this 3 times before removing the dumplings. American cooking classes said this was a waste of time and disrupted even cooking. Fluid dynamics researchers have since confirmed that this technique controls the differential between the outer wrapper temperature and the internal filling temperature. The cold water shock slows the outer dough just long enough for the filling to catch up, resulting in a wrapper that is cooked through without being gummy, and a filling that is fully cooked without the wrapper splitting. Add 1 cup of cold water each time the pot returns to boiling. 3 cycles total. This is not superstition. It is thermal engineering done intuitively. Number 25. Soaking rice in water before cooking it. This was actually listed as an inefficient practice in 1970s USDA rice preparation guidelines. Modern nutritional biochemistry has completely reversed that position. Soaking white or brown rice for 30 minutes to 2 hours before cooking activates phytase enzymes naturally present in the grain. These enzymes break down phytic acid, which is an anti-nutrient that blocks absorption of zinc, iron, and calcium. You are literally making your rice more nutritious just by soaking it. Rinse your rice, cover with cold water, let it sit for at least 30 minutes, drain, then cook with slightly less water than usual since the grains are already hydrated. The rice also cooks more evenly because hydrated grains heat at the same rate throughout. Number 24. Cooking pork belly in sugar before adding liquid. Chinese red braised pork, or hong shao ru, starts with caramelizing sugar and oil first before adding the meat or any liquid. Western culinary logic said you should brown the meat first for Maillard reaction flavors. Food chemistry research comparing both methods showed that caramelizing sugar first coats the pork belly surface with a polymer layer that acts as a moisture barrier, which means the fat renders more slowly and stays inside the meat longer during the braising process. Melt 3 tablespoons of rock sugar or granulated sugar in 2 tablespoons of oil over medium heat until it turns a deep amber. Add your blanched pork belly pieces, coat them thoroughly in the caramel, and then add your liquid. The caramel seal genuinely makes the difference between pork belly that is meltingly tender and one that just becomes dry and stringy. Number 23. Using chicken fat instead of oil for cooking vegetables. Chinese cooks have always kept a jar of rendered chicken fat in the kitchen. Western health authorities in the 1960s banned it from commercial use and discouraged it at home because of saturated fat concerns. Recent lipid research has shown that the oleic acid and linoleic acid profile of chicken fat is actually similar to olive oil, and when used in small quantities for high-heat vegetable cooking, it creates emulsification compounds that make vegetables absorb oil-soluble vitamins more efficiently. Save the fat that collects from roasting chicken, refrigerate it, and use a teaspoon when stir-frying bok choy, gai lan, or spinach. The flavor transformation is immediate and the nutritional benefit is now scientifically documented. Number 22. Adding a piece of dried tangerine peel to braised dishes. This ingredient, called chen pi, was classified as a food additive by several European import authorities and was briefly restricted in UK Chinese restaurants in the early 2000s. Ethnobotanical and flavor chemistry research confirmed that dried aged tangerine peel contains polymethoxylated flavones that do not exist in fresh citrus. These compounds actively bind to fat molecules in braised meats and carry them across the palate differently, creating what Chinese cooks have always described as a brightness that cuts through heaviness. Add 1 or 2 pieces of dried tangerine peel to any braised pork, duck, or beef dish. You can find it at any Chinese grocery store. Leave it in during the full cook, but do not eat it directly. Number 21. Blanching vegetables in salted boiling water before stir-frying. Chinese restaurant cooks blanch almost every vegetable before it hits the wok. Western restaurant kitchens considered this redundant and time-wasting. Sports nutrition and food science research has since demonstrated that a 30-second blanch in heavily salted water at full boil deactivates the enzymes responsible for cellular breakdown during high-heat cooking. This means your broccoli and snap peas stay brilliant green and genuinely crisp instead of turning army green and soft. Bring a large pot to a rolling boil, salt it aggressively, blanch for 30 seconds maximum, then transfer immediately to an ice bath. When you stir-fry, you are only adding heat and flavor, not trying to cook something raw in 30 seconds of wok time. This is why restaurant vegetables always look and taste better. Number 20. Marinating meat with egg white. This is closely related to velveting, but distinct. The practice of coating chicken or shrimp in egg white before cooking was flagged by food safety regulators in multiple American states as a raw egg contamination risk in commercial settings during the 1980s salmonella crackdowns. The protein chemistry tells a different story. Egg white contains ovomucin and lysozyme proteins that form a protective gel layer around individual pieces of meat. When heat hits that layer, it coagulates almost instantly and seals in moisture before the interior protein network has a chance to contract and squeeze out juices. Coat your chicken pieces in 1 egg white per pound of meat, add a teaspoon of cornstarch, mix thoroughly, and cook within 30 minutes. The internal moisture retention is measurably higher compared to unmarinated chicken cooked at the same temperature. Number 19. Frying garlic in cold oil before heating. Every Chinese recipe says to add garlic to cold or room temperature oil, then turn on the heat. Western culinary instruction says to heat the oil first, always. Food chemists studying allicin and thiosulfonate compounds found that starting garlic in cold oil allows those compounds to infuse into the oil gradually as temperature rises, creating a fundamentally different and more evenly distributed garlic flavor throughout the dish. Hot oil flash frying garlic burns the exterior compounds before they can dissolve into the cooking medium. For any dish that calls for garlic as an aromatic base, add it to cold oil, turn the heat to medium, and let it sizzle up slowly. The depth of garlic flavor you achieve is scientifically documented to be more complex and integrated. Number 18. Cooking with the highest possible heat and leaving food alone. Western cooking instruction emphasizes constant stirring and movement. The concept of wok hei, which translates roughly as breath of the wok, was dismissed by Western chefs as a romantic cultural story with no concrete culinary meaning. Combustion chemistry and food science research from serious culinary institutions, including the Maillard reaction studies at MIT, confirmed that wok hei is produced by a specific combination of extremely high heat, the brief ignition of vaporized oils above the cooking surface, and the Leidenfrost effect on food surfaces. To replicate this at home, get your largest pan to maximum heat before anything touches it, add a tiny amount of oil, add your food, and resist the urge to move it for at least 90 seconds. Let the surface properly sear before tossing. That char and smoky complexity is a real and measurable chemical transformation. Number 17. Adding Shaoxing wine to everything. Traditional Chinese cooking uses Shaoxing rice wine in almost every savory dish. American health codes in certain states required it to be labeled as an alcoholic additive and restricted its use in commercial food preparation, particularly in school or hospital kitchens. Flavor volatility research confirmed that Shaoxing wine contains amino acid chains and ester compounds that are unique to fermented rice and do not exist in any substitutes. These compounds bind with fat and protein during cooking and create flavor intermediaries that make food taste more dimensional. 2 tablespoons added to any stir-fry, braise, or soup just before the lid goes on will change the dish fundamentally. The alcohol cooks off completely within 90 seconds of high heat. Number 16. Using lard instead of vegetable oil for pastry and bread dough. Chinese pastry, from mooncake shells to scallion pancakes, traditionally uses lard. This was specifically targeted by American Heart Association guidelines in the 1960s and 70s and was banned from school cafeteria cooking programs. Modern lipid science research comparing the actual trans fat content and saturated fat ratios has shown that unprocessed lard has 0 trans fats and a fat profile that produces better lamination in dough than commercial shortening, which was its replacement. For scallion pancakes specifically, brush your dough layers with slightly warmed lard instead of oil, and you will achieve a genuine flakiness and layering that vegetable oil cannot replicate physically due to its lower melting point relative to dough temperature. Number 15. Double cooking meat by boiling it before frying or roasting. Cantonese roasted meats are blanched or simmered before going into the roasting oven or fryer. Western culinary schools said pre-boiling meat was inferior because it lost flavor to the water. Fat rendering research specifically on pork and duck showed that pre-boiling forces subcutaneous fat to render partially before high-heat cooking begins, meaning the skin achieves crispness in a fraction of the time without burning the outer surface while inner fat pockets remain unrendered. Simmer your pork belly or duck in plain water for 30 minutes. Let it air dry completely, ideally overnight in the refrigerator uncovered, then roast at extremely high heat. The skin will blister and crackle in ways that direct high-heat roasting without pre-cooking cannot achieve. Number 14. Using cornstarch in the cooking liquid at the end of stir-fry. The classic Chinese technique of adding a cornstarch slurry to finish a stir-fry was mocked in 1990s Western fusion cooking as a cheap Chinese restaurant shortcut. Colloid chemistry confirms this is one of the most functionally sophisticated techniques in all of cooking. Cornstarch granules in a hot liquid create a viscoelastic gel that coats every ingredient individually, holding the sauce to the surface of meat and vegetables instead of pooling at the bottom of the dish. Mix 1 teaspoon of cornstarch with 2 teaspoons of cold water per serving. Add it to your stir-fry in the last 30 seconds over high heat and toss immediately. The sauce transformation happens in under 15 seconds. Number 13. Scoring fish before cooking it. Chinese cooks make deep diagonal cuts into whole fish before steaming or frying. Western cooks considered this aesthetically unpleasant and said it dried out the fish. Thermal penetration studies showed that scoring creates channels for heat to travel directly to the thickest parts of the fish, reducing the temperature differential between thick and thin sections by up to 40%. It also creates pathways for marinade and aromatics to penetrate the flesh rather than sitting only on the surface. Make diagonal cuts about 2/3 deep through the flesh all the way to the bone at 1-inch intervals on both sides of the fish before any cooking method. Number 12. Cooking with a whole dried chili versus ground chili powder. Traditional Sichuan cooking uses whole dried chilies toasted in oil. Ground chili powder was considered equivalent or superior by Western spice companies for decades. Capsaicin extraction research demonstrated that whole dried chilies release their oil-soluble capsaicin and flavor terpenes gradually and differently than ground powder, which releases most compounds instantly and then burns off. Toast 3 to 5 whole dried chilies in room temperature oil, gradually raising heat until the chilies turn just 1 shade darker. Remove them or leave them in. The oil is now transformed into something that delivers complex layered heat rather than a single sharp burn. Number 11. Using bone broth as your cooking liquid rather than water or commercial stock. Traditional Chinese soups use bones simmered for 6 to 12 hours. American commercial kitchen regulations in the 1970s and 80s required stock to reach specific temperatures quickly for safety, which inadvertently pushed shorter cooking times and ultimately commercial stock cubes. Collagen hydrolysis science confirms that genuine long-cooked bone broth contains hydroxyproline and glycine peptides that commercial stock completely lacks. These are not just flavor compounds. They are bioactive proteins that also improve the mouthfeel and body of any dish cooked in them. Number 10. Fermenting black beans before cooking with them. Dushi, or Chinese fermented black beans, were subject to import restrictions in multiple Western countries because regulators could not classify them accurately under existing food fermentation categories. Microbiome research has identified the specific strains of Aspergillus and Bacillus bacteria involved in black bean fermentation as producing nattokinase and other enzymes that remain active even after brief cooking and benefit cardiovascular health. Rinse fermented black beans lightly but not completely, chop them roughly to release their aromatics, and cook them in oil as an early aromatic in your dish just like garlic. Number 9. Pressing tofu under weight before cooking. Chinese cooks always wrapped tofu in cloth and placed a heavy object on top for 30 minutes before frying. Western cooking dismissed this as time-consuming and unnecessary. Material science research on tofu structure confirmed that pressing removes enough moisture from the outer cell matrix that the surface undergoes genuine Maillard browning rather than steaming in its own water. Unpressed tofu steams rather than fries, no matter how hot your oil. Press for minimum 30 minutes, ideally 2 hours. Number 8. Using MSG as a finishing seasoning. Monosodium. Glutamate was banned from use in school cafeteria food in many American states after 1970s panic studies. Subsequent gold standard double-blind research at every major food science institution globally has definitively shown MSG is no more harmful than table salt and that the original studies were methodologically flawed. It activates umami receptors in ways salt cannot. Add a small pinch of MSG along with your salt at the end of cooking any savory dish. Number 7. Letting rice rest off heat with the lid on. Chinese rice cooking always involves turning off the heat and letting the rice steam in residual heat for 10 minutes before opening. Western rice instructions mostly say to serve immediately. Starch. Gelatinization research confirms the residual steam period allows remaining moisture to redistribute evenly throughout the grain, completing starch gelatinization without overcooking. Always rest your cooked rice for 10 minutes with the lid completely sealed. Number 6. Charring the aromatics before adding to soup. Chinese chefs char whole ginger and scallions directly over an open flame before adding to broth. This was banned in Western commercial kitchens as a fire hazard and considered to introduce carbon into food. Maillard and pyrolysis chemistry at cooking temperatures confirms that charring ginger creates new flavor compounds including specific furans and pyrazines that do not exist in raw or even roasted ginger, creating depth that adds genuine complexity to clear broths without making them bitter. Number 5. Cooking rice with a small amount of oil in the water. A tiny teaspoon of neutral oil added to rice cooking water was discouraged in Western health guidelines. But molecular gastronomy research showed that the oil creates a hydrophobic coating on starch granules as they hydrate, preventing the surface starch from becoming sticky and allowing each grain to remain separate. It also helps the oil, soluble aroma compounds from the rice itself, distribute more evenly throughout the finished dish. Number 4. Double frying for crispiness. Chinese fried chicken and spring rolls are always fried twice. American fried food traditions generally fry once. Oil absorption physics confirmed that the first fry at lower temperature removes moisture from the interior of the food. The resting period allows remaining steam to escape. The second fry at higher temperature creates a rapid crust formation on a now dry surface that stays crispy for dramatically longer. First fry at 325 degrees until just cooked. Rest for at least 5 minutes. Second fry at 375 degrees for 2 to 3 minutes maximum. Number 3. Adding vinegar at the very end of cooking rather than the beginning. Chinese braised dishes and soups often get a small splash of Qingqiang black vinegar right at the end. Western technique adds acid early. Ester chemistry research showed that acetic acid added to a hot dish at the end volatilizes partially, leaving behind acetate compounds that enhance umami perception without adding sourness. Added early, most of the acid cooks into the dish and registers as sour rather than as brightness. Add your vinegar in the last 30 seconds with the heat still on. Number 2. Steeping green onions in hot fat rather than cooking them. Traditional Chinese oil preparations pour near smoking oil directly over raw scallions. Western culinary instruction said this was imprecise and potentially dangerous. Flavor extraction chemistry showed that flash heating scallion compounds in a controlled pour of hot oil extracts and stabilizes sulfide flavor compounds instantaneously, creating a blooming effect that produces more aromatic complexity than any amount of slow cooking achieves. Heat your oil to just below smoking point. Prepare your raw sliced scallions in a heat-proof bowl. Pour oil over in one single motion and listen for that dramatic sizzle. That sound is flavor being created in real time. And the number one technique that scientists spent decades dismissing and are now calling one of the most sophisticated flavor development methods in all of global cuisine. Aging soy sauce in clay pots exposed to sunlight. Traditional Chinese soy sauce makers exposed their clay fermentation pots to full outdoor sunlight daily. Western food safety regulations banned outdoor food production entirely. Photochemistry and fermentation science have now shown that UV exposure through porous clay walls create specific Maillard compounds and amino acid transformations that temperature-controlled indoor fermentation cannot replicate. Modern artisan producers are now building UV exposure chambers to replicate what Chinese makers knew instinctively. You cannot make this at home easily, but you can seek out traditionally sun-fermented soy sauce from Guangdong province. The difference in a finished dish is immediately and unmistakably apparent to anyone who has cooked with both. If this changed the way you think about cooking, share it with someone who loves food. There are more food science secrets worth uncovering, and we are just getting started.